"I dream about a curvy woman like you," the Amish man declared to the obese schoolteacher. The dusty main street falls silent. The townsfolk stare. A plain man in black hat has just spoken words no one dares say aloud. For the weary schoolteacher, mocked and ridiculed for years, his bold voice feels like a thunderclap. But what seems like kindness soon lights a fire of gossip, jealousy, and danger. The school board wants her gone. The railroad agent wants his land, and whispers of scandal grow louder with every toll of the church bell. Yet in the quiet glow of lamplight, two hearts begin to find something deeper than shame, stronger than fear. But when fire consumes the schoolhouse and the town turns against him, a hidden deed and an elder's truth may be the only thing that can save them. Will the teacher's courage and the Amish man's faith be enough to overcome prejudice, greed, and betrayal? Or will their dream of love be buried in the dust of Calico Springs? Tell me in the comments where you're watching from right now and if this story speaks to you. Make sure you hit subscribe so you don't miss the next one, Clara. Bennett clutched her books tighter to her chest as she walked down the wooden sidewalk, her cheeks still burning from the encounter. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across Calico Springs' main street, and every face she passed seemed to hold a knowing smirk or a barely concealed whisper. Did you hear what the Amish farmer said to the schoolteacher? Right there in broad daylight, the words followed her like autumn leaves skittering along the dusty street. Clara quickened her pace, her sensible boots clicking against the planks. The mercantile's bell jingled as another cluster of women emerged, their conversation dropping two hushed tones at the sight of her. She could still see Daniel Yoder's steady gaze, could hear his clear voice cutting through the cruel laughter of the matrons. "I dream about a curvy woman like you." The words had stopped time itself, shocking everyone within earshot into silence. Even now, hours later, she couldn't make sense of it inside her small house near the schoolyard. Clara set her books down on the kitchen table with trembling hands. The familiar comfort of her home, the carefully arranged shelf of beloved novels, the cheerful yellow curtains she'd sewn herself, the vase of wild asters she'd gathered with her students did little to calm her racing thoughts. Through her window, she watched wagon wheels kick up dust as families headed home for supper. Mrs. Peterson and Mrs. Miller, the two matrons who'd started it all with their snickering, passed by in their fine carriages. Clara stepped back from the window, though she could still hear fragments of their animated conversation. An Amish man, of all people, and him a widower with that quiet little niece. Clara sank into her rocking chair, remembering how Daniel had simply picked up her scattered books, his movements unhurried and dignified. He'd handed them back without a trace of mockery or pity in his expression, just that same steady gaze that had made her heart skip. The kettle whistled on her small stove, calling her back to her evening routine. As she prepared her tea, more wagons rattled past, more voices carried through her thin walls. The whole town was abuzz with the story, she realized, her hands shaking as she poured hot water over the tea leaves. Bold as brass, he was. What will the elders in his community say? That poor schoolteacher Clara wrapped her shawl tighter around her shoulders, though the evening wasn't particularly cold. She'd spent years building a quiet life here, earning respect through her dedication to her pupils. Now Daniel Yoder's impulsive words threatened to upset everything she'd worked for. Yet beneath her anxiety, a tiny spark of something else flickered. No man had ever spoken up for her like that, let alone declared her worthy of dreams. She remembered the way Daniel had stood, tall and certain in his plain black coat, his beard neat and his eyes clear as the Colorado sky. There had been no shame in his voice, no hesitation. The sun dipped behind the mountains, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold. From her porch, Clara could see lights coming on in windows all across town. In every home, she knew, families were gathering around their supper tables, talking about what had happened in front of the mercantile that afternoon. she thought of Rebecca, Daniel's shy niece, who struggled so much with her reading, but whose face lit up during singing time. What would the child think of all this? Would she be teased at school tomorrow? Clara's heart ached at the thought. A horse and buggy clattered past in the growing dusk, the evening stage, bringing mail and news from Denver. But today, Clara knew, the most interesting news in Calico Springs had nothing to do with the wider world. It was about a quiet Amish farmer, a curvy schoolteacher, and words that couldn't be taken back. Clara touched her cheeks, still warm with the memory of that moment. All her life, she'd tried to make herself smaller to avoid drawing attention. Now Daniel Yoder had done the opposite. He'd drawn every eye in town to her, but in a way that challenged their cruel judgments rather than confirming them. As night settled over the small rail town, Clara sat in her darkening parlor, listening to the familiar sounds of Calico Springs settling down for the evening, doors closing, children being called in, the distant whistle of a freight train. Tomorrow would bring what it would bring. For now, she held the memory of Daniel's words close. Like a lamp against the gathering dark, the morning sun streamed through the schoolhouse windows as Clara's key turned in the lock. Her hands trembled so badly she nearly dropped the heavy iron key. Inside, chalk dust sparkled in the golden light, while yesterday's lessons still covered the black slate boards. She traced her fingers over the neat multiplication tables, seeking comfort in their unchanging certainty. The first patter of footsteps on the wooden steps made her stomach clench. But when the door creaked open, young Tommy Wilson burst in with his usual grin, followed by his sister Sarah carrying their shared primer. More children filtered in, their cheerful "Good morning, Miss Bennett," bringing unexpected warmth to her chest. Rebecca Yoder slipped in quietly, her plain dress and white cap marking her apart from the other students. Yet today, instead of hurrying to her back row seat, she gave Clara a tiny smile before ducking her head. The morning passed in familiar routine, recitation, arithmetic, and geography lessons. Clara began to relax, losing herself in the rhythm of teaching. But as the noon bell approached, her heavy footsteps in the corridor made her pause mid-dash sentence. Mr. Albert Hensley filled the doorframe, his merchant's waistcoat straining slightly at the buttons. The school board chairman's expression was grave as he gestured Clara aside. A word. Miss Bennett. His voice carried across the suddenly silent classroom. Children, continue your reading. In the hallway, chalk dust danced in shaft of sunlight between them. Mr. Hensley cleared his throat. There have been concerns raised about yesterday's incident. Clara's throat tightened. Sir, your appearance, he continued, adjusting his watch chain, and certain public interactions have become a subject of discussion among the board members. We must consider the example being set for our students. The threat hung clear in the air between them. Clara's hands clutched her skirts, knuckles white. Perhaps Mr. Hensley suggested, his voice dropping lower, it would be best to consider your position here temporary, unless certain improvements are made. He departed with a curt nod, leaving Clara struggling to breathe in the dusty hallway. She pressed her palm flat against the rough wooden wall, willing herself steady. Through the door, she could hear her students shuffling, waiting. Somehow, she made it through the afternoon lessons. Her voice remained clear as she led the spelling drills, though her heart felt squeezed in an iron grip. Only once, during the penmanship hour, did she have to turn to the window, dabbing quickly at her eyes with her handkerchief. When the final bell rang, Clara's shoulders sagged with relief. But as the children gathered their slates and books, she noticed Rebecca lingering, glancing repeatedly toward the door. Outside on the schoolhouse steps, Daniel Yoder stood waiting, his broad-brimmed black hat in his hands. The sight of him made Clara's pulse jump, but it was Rebecca who moved first, darting to his side and returning with a small bouquet of purple and yellow wildflowers. For you, teacher, Rebecca whispered, offering the flowers with both hands. Uncle Daniel helped me gather them this morning. Clara's fingers brushed Rebecca's as she accepted the gift. The simple sweetness of the gesture, combined with the memory of Mr. Hensley's threats, nearly undid her composure. But then she caught the scent of the flowers, fresh and honest as the morning dew, and suddenly found herself laughing. Really laughing for the first time in weeks. "They're beautiful," she managed, holding the bouquet close. "Thank you, Rebecca. And thank you, Mr. Yoder. And thank you, Mr. Yoder." Daniel stepped forward, his presence solid and calm as an oak tree. "I meant what I said yesterday," he stated quietly. "Among my people, we see things differently. A woman's curves are seen as signs of health and God's blessing, like the roundness of ripened wheat or the fullness of summer." Fruit's heat bloomed in Clara's cheeks, but before she could respond, the clip-clop of approaching carriages made her look up. Mrs. Peterson and Mrs. Miller drove past, their faces pinched with disapproval. "Shameless," one of them muttered, loud enough to carrying on right in front of the children. Clara watched them go, her earlier joy dimming like a cloud passing over the sun. Yet Daniel remained steady beside her, neither advancing nor retreating. While Rebecca's small hand found its way into hers, the late afternoon light painted long shadows across the schoolyard as Clara finally turned toward home. Her rented rooms above the milliner's shop waited, tidy but empty. With each step, her heart wavered between hope and despair. Mr. Hensley's threats echoed in her mind. Yet so did Daniel's words about wheat and summer fruits. The wildflowers in her hand caught the sunset's glow, their colors bold against her dark skirts. She climbed the back stairs to her quarters slowly, each step heavy with the weight of decisions yet to come. The flowers found a home in her best water pitcher, bright against the fading light. As dusk gathered outside her window, Clara stood looking at them, her heart still caught between the crushing shame of the morning and the unexpected balm of Daniel's gentle defense. 2 days crawled by like molasses in winter. Clara sat at her desk Thursday evening, the brass lamp casting a warm circle around her papers. Red marks dotted the arithmetic exercises before her. But her mind kept wandering to the letter that had arrived that afternoon, a formal summons to appear before the school board on Saturday. Her pen trembled over Tommy Wilson's long division. "Must maintain composure," she whispered to herself, straightening her spine. The lamp's flame flickered as a cool breeze slipped through the window, carrying the scent of approaching autumn miles away at the Yoder homestead. Daniel stood in his barnyard as 2 Amish elders prepared to depart. Elder Stoltzfus adjusted his hitching straps with deliberate slowness. "Your wandering tongue brings unwanted eyes upon us." "Daniel," the elder said in Pennsylvania Dutch. "First the English teacher, now gossip in town." "This is not our way." Daniel's jaw tightened. "I spoke truth, nothing more." "Truth can be dangerous among the English," Elderborn Traeger added, climbing into his buggy. "Remember your responsibilities to the community." After their buggies disappeared down the dusty road, Daniel entered his barn. In the growing darkness, he knelt on the straw-covered floor. Scripture flowing from his lips in quiet German, a prayer for wisdom. For guidance through these troubled waters, the next morning dawned crisp and clear. Clara arrived early to start the schoolhouse stove, only to find Daniel already there, stacking split oak by the door. His quiet presence filled the empty classroom. "You needn't trouble yourself," Clara protested, though warmth bloomed in her chest at his thoughtfulness. "No trouble," Daniel replied, brushing sawdust from his hands. "Winter's coming. You shouldn't face its chill alone." His words carried more weight than just the firewood. Rebecca appeared in the doorway, clutching her books. The sight of her uncle and teacher together brought a shy smile to her face as the day's lessons ended and shadows lengthened across the schoolyard. Clara found herself inviting them both to supper. "I have a pot of beef stew," she offered, surprising herself with her boldness. "More than enough to share." In her quarters above the milliner's shop, Clara ladled steaming stew into her best bowls. The lamplight cast a homey glow as they gathered around her small table. Daniel's prayer of thanks, spoken in English for her benefit, filled the room with peace. Rebecca sat between them, her spoon moving carefully as she watched the adults from beneath her bonnet. Finally, she set down her spoon. "Teacher," she whispered, "I must tell you something." Clara leaned forward. "What is it, dear?" Rebecca's voice quavered. "I cannot read the lesson hymns. The letters. They dance away from me." Daniel's hand found his niece's shoulder as Clara reached across the table to touch Rebecca's arm. "Then we shall help them stand still," Clara promised. Together, the girls' relieved smile lit the room brighter than any lamp. They finished their meal in comfortable conversation, sharing stories of classroom mishaps and farm life. When they finally rose to leave, the evening had wrapped them in a warm blanket of companionship. "Dunca, thank you," Daniel said at the door, his voice soft, "for everything." Clara watched them descend the back stairs, their figures merging with the gathering dusk. Her heart felt lighter than it had in days. But as she turned back inside, something white caught her eye. A folded paper pushed beneath her door. Her fingers trembled as she opened it. The message, scratched in an anonymous hand, struck like a physical blow. "Children deserve better than an unfit teacher. Remember your place." The paper crackled in her clenched fist as she sank into her chair. Outside her window, crickets chirped in the darkness, oblivious to how the flames of town hostility burned ever higher. The warmth of shared stew and friendship began to cool, leaving only the bitter taste of fear. Yet somewhere in the night, Rebecca's shy smile and Daniel's steady presence remained, like stars offering guidance through the gathering storm. Clara smoothed the crumpled note, placed it in her desk drawer, and straightened her shoulders. Saturday's meeting loomed, but she was no longer completely alone. The lamp burned low as she prepared for bed, its light catching the dried flowers Daniel and Rebecca had given her days before, still bright, still standing tall in their pitcher. Despite everything, Saturday morning dawned beneath a blanket of pewter clouds that hung low over Calico Springs. Clara stood before her mirror, pinning her hair with trembling fingers. The threat of rain matched her spirits as she buttoned her best navy dress, her heart drumming against her ribs. A soft knock at her door made her start. She opened it to find Daniel and Rebecca waiting, both dressed in their plain but spotless Sunday clothes. Rebecca held a small bunch of late wildflowers. "You needn't come," Clara whispered, though relief flooded her chest at their presence. "We walked together," Daniel said simply, offering his arm. The gesture brought color to Clara's cheeks, but she accepted. Drawing strength from his steadiness, they made their way down Main Street, their boots clicking against the wooden sidewalk. The meeting house loomed ahead, its white clapboard walls stark against the threatening sky. Already, townsfolk streamed through its doors, their Sunday best rustling with self-dash importance. Inside, oil lamps cast yellow light across the gathered faces. The school board members sat at a long table facing the crowd, Chairman Hensley in the center, his pocket watch gleaming on his vest. Clara's footsteps echoed as she walked to the chair placed before them, conscious of every eye upon her. "Miss Bennett," Chairman Hensley began, clearing his throat. "We've called this meeting to address concerns about your example to the children." He shifted in his chair. "A teacher must represent proper moral character and deportment. Your appearance has become a subject of discussion." Hot shame crept up Clara's neck, but before she could speak, a chair scraped against the wooden floor. Daniel rose, his tall frame commanding attention. "If I may address the gathering," he said, his voice carrying to every corner. "I have watched Miss Bennett teach. Her worth lies not in her waistline, but in her love for children and strength of heart." He gestured to Rebecca. "My niece struggles with letters, yet Miss Bennett stays late, helping her without judgment." Is this not the measure of a true teacher? Murmurs rippled through the crowd like wind through wheat. Clara felt tears prick her eyes, but she stood straighter. Finding her voice at last, "I have given 6 years to this school," she said clearly. "Let me tell you of Tommy Matthews, the orphan boy who couldn't write his name when he came to us. Now he reads adventure stories to the younger children." She turned to face the crowd. "Or Sarah Two Stars, who feared no one would welcome her. In my classroom, she found friendship with settler children, bridging to worlds with her smile." More whispers filled the room. Clara saw Mrs. Peterson, whose son she'd nursed through scarlet fever, nodding slowly. But Widow Graves and her sewing circle scowled, their fans fluttering like angry birds. Chairman Hensley tugged at his collar, glancing between the divided crowd. Perhaps this matter requires further review. We shall postpone our decision until next month's meeting." He rapped his gavel quickly, as if afraid of more discussion. Clara's legs felt weak as she gathered her shawl. Daniel's steady presence at her elbow guided her through the crowd and out into the gray afternoon. Rebecca slipped her small hand into Clara's, squeezing gently. They had only walked a block when a well-dressed figure stepped from the shadows of the mercantile. "Mr. Horace Lyle." The railroad agent blocked their path with a practiced smile. "Mr. Yoder," he said smoothly, "I've been hoping to speak with you." His eyes flickered dismissively over Clara and Rebecca. "About your spring-fed property. The railroad is prepared to make a generous offer." Daniel's expression hardened. "My land is not for sale." "Come now," Lyle pressed, pulling out a leather wallet. $5,000. More than fair for such modest acreage. "The spring waters my crops and livestock," Daniel replied. "It sustained my wife's family before her. No amount of money can replace it." The agent's smile thinned to a blade's edge. "Progress cannot be stopped, Mr. Yoder. The railroad is coming through Calico Springs, one way or another. Best to profit while you can." His voice dropped. "Before things become difficult." Clara felt Daniel stiffen beside her. Rebecca pressed closer to her uncle's leg. Sensing the tension, "Good day, Mr. Lyle," Daniel said firmly, guiding Clara and Rebecca around the agent. They walked on in silence, the threatening sky finally releasing its first heavy drops. Behind them, Lyle's cold stare followed their retreat, his leather wallet snapping shut like a promise of trouble to come. The autumn morning dawned crisp and clear, the Sunday silence broken only by church bells echoing across Calico Springs. Clara smoothed her skirts nervously as she waited on her porch, having accepted Daniel's invitation to visit his homestead. The clop of hooves announced his arrival, and soon his wagon appeared, Rebecca waving eagerly from the seat beside him. "Good morning, Miss Bennett," Daniel called, bringing the mule to a halt. He stepped down to help Clara aboard, his strong hands steady and respectful. Clara settled beside Rebecca, who clutched a worn hymnal to her chest. The wagon rolled out of town, wheels crunching over fallen leaves that carpeted the dirt road. Around them, the countryside blazed with autumn glory, maples burning red against the azure sky, aspens shimmering gold in the morning light. Clara breathed deeply, tasting freedom in the clean mountain air. "It's beautiful out here," she said softly. Watching a hawk circle overhead, Daniel nodded, pride warming his voice. "The Lord bless this land. Been in my wife's family 3 generations now." After 20 minutes, they crested a gentle rise. Below stretched Daniel's homestead, a sturdy log cabin nestled in a protected hollow, smoke curling from its stone chimney. A barn stood nearby, its fresh-painted walls gleaming white. But what caught Clara's eye was the crystal stream that emerged from rocks behind the cabin, winding through pastures where fat cattle grazed. The spring, Daniel explained as they approached, feeds the whole valley. Town's wells would run dry without it. He clicked to the mule, guiding them down the slope, Railroad wants it bad. But water's meant for sharing, not selling. Clara understood suddenly why Mr. Lyle coveted this land. Without the spring, he couldn't supply his steam engines or the towns he planned to build. Her heart ached at the thought of this peaceful place destroyed by progress. Daniel helped them down at the cabin door. Inside, the main room was plain, but welcoming worn plank floors scrubbed clean. Windows bright with sunlight, a Bible on the table beside a vase of late wildflowers. The air smelled of fresh bread and coffee. Rebecca helped bake this morning, Daniel said, bringing out a loaf still warm from the oven. The child ducked her head, pleased. They spent the afternoon exploring the homestead. Daniel showed Clara his workshop, where he crafted furniture for neighbors, the garden plot where Rebecca was learning to grow vegetables, the apple trees heavy with fruit. Everything spoke of care and connection to the land as evening approached. They gathered for a simple supper of beef stew and fresh bread. Rebecca set the table carefully, placing a small oil lamp in the center. The familiar routine of passing dishes and breaking bread together wrapped Clara in unexpected comfort. She couldn't remember the last time she'd shared a family meal like this. After the dishes were cleared, Rebecca brought out her hymnal. Would you like to hear me sing?" She asked Clara shyly. "I'd love to." Clara answered warmly. The child opened to a well-worn page and began a German hymn, her sweet voice trembling slightly. When she stumbled over the words, Clara gently helped her sound them out, just as she did with reading lessons. Daniel joined in, his deep voice steady beneath Rebecca's soprano. Soon Clara added her own alto, and the cabin filled with three-part harmony. Rebecca's face glowed with pride as they finished. "That was beautiful," she exclaimed. Like real singing at meeting. Clara felt moisture in her eyes at the child's joy. This was what teaching should be, helping young hearts bloom with confidence and achievement. She caught Daniel watching her, his expression soft in the lamplight. The peaceful moment shattered as they stepped outside to hitch the wagon for Clara's return journey. A horse and rider stood outlined against the sunset on a distant ridge, one of Mr. Lyle's men, out, marking the spring's location. Daniel's jaw tightened as he stared at the shadowy figure. "He's been watching all afternoon," Rebecca whispered, pressing close to Clara's skirts. "Don't fret," Daniel said calmly, though Clara saw worry in his eyes. "The Lord watches closer still." He turned to assist Clara into the wagon, his hands lingering protectively on her arm. As they drove back to Wardtown, Clara glanced over her shoulder. The rider remained on the ridge, a dark reminder of the forces gathering against this peaceful homestead. But stronger than her fear was the memory of candlelight on Rebecca's face as she sang, of Daniel's quiet strength, of the simple grace of belonging, however briefly, to a family circle. Some things, she realized, were worth fighting for. The following week brought storms to Calico Springs, both in the skies and in Clara's heart. Dark clouds gathered over the mountains as she walked to school each morning, matching her growing unease. The whispers that had started after Daniel's declaration now grew into open criticism. On Tuesday morning, Mrs. Harrison marched into the schoolhouse before classes began, her face pinched with displeasure. "I simply cannot have my Emily learning from someone who draws such attention," she announced, steering her daughter toward the door. Clara watched them go, her hands trembling as she erased yesterday's lessons from the blackboard. By Wednesday, 3 more parents had withdrawn their children. Each empty desk felt like a personal wound. Clara tried to keep her voice steady as she led the remaining students through their arithmetic. But inside, her confidence crumbled like dried leaves. That afternoon, Daniel appeared at the schoolhouse door after dismissal, his broad-brimmed hat in his hands. Rebecca lingered in the yard, collecting late-blooming daisies. "Miss Bennet," he said quietly, "I've been thinking on your troubles." Clara looked up from her grading, trying to hide the tears that threatened. "Have you now?" Yeah, he pulled up a small chair, looking somewhat comical on the child-sized seat. Our community has need of a teacher, too. The children learn at home now, but with winter coming, he paused, choosing his words carefully. What if you were to teach both English and Amish together at my farmstead? Clara's pen slipped, leaving an ink blot on her papers. Mr. Yoder, I couldn't possibly impose. It's no imposition, he interrupted gently. The barn's warm, plenty of space. And Rebecca. He glanced out the window at his niece. She needs proper schooling. Others, too. Clara followed his gaze. Rebecca knelt in the schoolyard, carefully arranging her flowers. The sight stirred something in Clara's heart. Hope, perhaps. Or determination. Let me think on it, she said finally. Daniel nodded, rising. That's all I ask. He paused at the door. Rebecca's ready for her reading lesson, if you're still willing. Clara gathered her materials, including a primer she'd set aside especially for Rebecca. They walked together to Daniel's wagon, where Rebecca waited eagerly despite her obvious nervousness. The ride to Daniel's homestead was quiet, broken only by the clip-clop of the mule's hooves and Rebecca humming softly to herself. Inside the cabin, Clara lit the oil lamp while Daniel built up the fire. The autumn evening was drawing in early, shadows gathering in the corners. Now then, Clara said, opening the primer on the table. Shall we begin? Rebecca's face scrunched with concentration as she stared at the letters. The sea cat, she stumbled over the words, her finger tracing each one. That's right, Clara encouraged. Sound it out slowly. Daniel sat in his rocking chair, whittling what looked like a small wooden horse. But Clara noticed his hands would still whenever Rebecca managed a difficult word, his stern face softening with pride. The cat sat on the mat. Rebecca finished triumphantly. Wonderful. Clara clapped her hands. You're learning so quickly. The lesson continued until the lamp needed refilling. Though Rebecca struggled, her determination never wavered. When they finished, she hugged the primer to her chest. May I keep it? To practice. Of course, Clara smiled, touched by the child's enthusiasm. The night had fully fallen by the time Daniel drove Clara home. Stars pricked the dark sky, and a cool wind carried the scent of pine from the mountains. Clara wrapped her shawl tighter, thinking about Daniel's proposal, teaching both communities' children together. It was a bold idea, perhaps even a dangerous one. But something about it felt right, like the first rays of sun after a long storm. Rays of sun after a long storm. As Daniel helped her down from the wagon, he said softly, Think on what I said, Miss Bennett. You have a gift for teaching. Shame to waste it on account of small-minded folk. Clara nodded, unable to find words past the lump in her throat. She watched the wagon disappear into the darkness before turning toward her door. There, on the top step, sat a covered basket inside. She found fresh bread still warm from the oven, a jar of preserved peaches, and a small wheel of cheese. No note, no indication of who had left it. But the kindness of the gesture brought tears to her eyes. Later, as Clara prepared for bed, she knelt beside it as she did each night. Lord, she whispered, grant me wisdom to see your path, and strength to walk it. Whatever it may be, the wind whispered through the cottonwoods outside her window, and somewhere in the distance a whippoorwill called into the night. A week passed, and autumn's golden light bathed Daniel Yoder's homestead as wagons creaked up the dusty path. The morning air carried the promise of fellowship as both plain folk and town residents arrived for the barn raising. Women balanced covered dishes and fresh-baked pies, while men rolled up their sleeves. Ready for the day's labor, Clara Bennett watched from beneath a sprawling oak tree as Daniel greeted each arrival with quiet dignity. His steady presence seemed to bridge the usual divide between the communities. Work-worn hands clasped in greeting, and children darted between wagon wheels, their laughter rising above the general bustle. Miss Bennett. Rebecca called, tugging at Clara's sleeve. "May we organize some games for the little ones?" Clara smiled, grateful for the child's enthusiasm. "Of course. Shall we gather them under these shade trees?" Soon Clara had arranged the children in a circle, teaching them both English and German counting songs. Even the most reluctant youngsters joined in as she led them in Duck, Duck, Goose, and Ring around the rosy. Their voices carried across the homestead, providing a cheerful backdrop to the measured thuds of hammers and calls of men coordinating their efforts by midday. The barn's framework reached toward the cloudless sky. Women spread quilts beneath the trees, laying out a feast that spoke of both traditions. Golden loaves of Amish bread alongside Mrs. Peterson's famous apple pies, and fresh churned butter next to Thompson's store-bought preserves. "Miss Bennet," Rebecca whispered as the children settled for lunch, clutching her primer. "Might I read something?" "From the book." Clara's heart warmed at the girl's courage. "If you wish to, sweetheart." Rebecca stood, her small voice trembling at first as she began reading a Bible verse. "The Lord is my shepherd. I shall not want." The conversations around them gradually stilled as people realized what was happening. Rebecca's voice grew stronger with each word, and when she finished, spontaneous applause erupted from both plain and English folk alike. Daniel, who had paused in his work to listen, beamed with quiet pride as afternoon mellowed into evening. Lanterns began to glow like earthbound stars. The newly raised barn stood solid and true against the darkening sky, a testament to what could be accomplished when hands worked together. Someone produced a fiddle, and soon music filled the air, a mixture of hymns and dancing tunes that had feet tapping in the cos, mute tapping in the tas. Clara found herself seated on a hay bale beside Daniel, watching the festivities. Children chased fireflies while their elders visited in small groups. Differences momentarily forgotten in the joy of accomplishment. The familiar strains of Amazing Grace wove through the gathering darkness, sung in both English and German. "It puts me in mind of how things could be," Daniel said softly, his voice barely carrying above the music. "All of us, working together, teaching together." His hand rested close to hers on the hay bale. Not quite touching. Clara felt her heart quicken at his nearness. The lantern light caught the silver threading through his dark hair, and his eyes held a warmth that made her breath catch. For a moment, it seemed he might say more, something that had been building between them since that first bold declaration on the street. "The school plans," Clara said quickly, her voice higher than usual. "We should discuss the practical arrangements. The barn would need desks and proper lighting for winter days." Daniel's expression flickered, but he nodded, accepting her retreat. "Yeah, there is much to consider." But tonight, he gestured to the scene before them. "Tonight shows what is possible, does it not?" They sat together as the evening deepened, their laughter mingling with the music and singing that drifted up toward the star-scattered sky. Joy filled the air like a tangible thing, yet beneath it ran in a current of unspoken words and tender glances that neither quite dared to acknowledge. The festivities continued until the moon rose high, casting silver light across the new barn's sturdy beams. Families began loading their wagons for home, children sleeping on parents' shoulders. While the last hymn notes faded into the cricket song night, Clara watched it all with a full heart, even as she felt the weight of what had almost been said between her and Daniel. For one perfect day, prejudice had seemed to fade like morning mist, revealing the possibility of true community. Yet as she helped gather the last cups and plates, she wondered if such harmony could last beyond this golden evening. Dawn broke over Calico Springs with an ominous orange glow. Clara Bennet stirred in her bed, awakened by an acrid scent drifting through her window. Her eyes flew open as she recognized the smell of smoke, hastily throwing on her dress. She rushed outside onto her small porch. Her heart stopped at the sight. Black smoke billowed against the pale morning sky. rising from the direction of Daniel's homestead where the new schoolhouse had been nearly completed. Fire! Someone shouted from down the street. The town bell began to clang urgently, its iron voice calling people from their homes. Clara gathered her skirts and ran toward the rising smoke, her boots kicking up dust on the empty morning street. Other townspeople emerged from their houses, pointing and rushing toward the blaze. The closer she got, the more her chest tightened with dread. The newly raised schoolhouse was engulfed in flames. Orange tongues licked the fresh-cut timber, consuming the carefully joined beams and boards. Daniel stood before it, directing a line of men passing buckets from the spring. His face was streaked with soot, his plain shirt darkened with sweat and ash. It was too far gone when we spotted it, a man told Clara as she joined the growing crowd. Started somehow in the night, Clara watched helplessly as the roof timbers crashed inward, sending a shower of sparks toward the lightening sky. All their hopes, all their plans, burning before their eyes. The heat pressed against her face like a physical force, driving her back a step. Convenient timing, wouldn't you say? A woman's voice carried clearly through the crowd. Just when the school board was about to make their decision. What are you suggesting? Clara turned to face Mrs. Peterson, one of the town's most notorious gossips. Well, the woman sniffed. Some folks are saying the plain man might have done it himself. Jealous of the proper school board? Maybe. Or trying to force everyone to send their children to his land instead. That's ridiculous. Clara's voice rose sharply. Daniel would never then. Why was he first to spot the fire? Another voice joined in, already out here when everyone else was sleeping. Clara looked desperately toward Daniel, still working with the bucket line, though the schoolhouse was clearly lost. His face remained stern with concentration, giving no sign he heard the whispers spreading through the gathered crowd like poison. The morning wore on, and gradually the flames died down to smoking ruins. The sheriff arrived, his boots crunching on the charred timber as he examined the scene. Clara watched as he spoke to several townspeople, his expression growing darker with each conversation. As dusk approached, the sheriff's wagon rattled up to Daniel's cabin. Clara, who had been helping clean up the debris, felt her heart sink as she watched the lawman disappear inside with Daniel. Through the window, she could see their serious faces illuminated by lamplight. Daniel Yoder, the sheriff's voice carried clearly through the evening air. I've got multiple reports putting you near the schoolhouse late last night, and you were mighty quick to spot this fire. I rise before dawn to tend the animals. Daniel's steady reply came. As I have done every day since I was a boy. That may be so. But given the circumstances, there's talk of pressing charges. Arson's a serious matter. Mr. Yoder, I'd advise you to think carefully about your situation. Clara couldn't bear to hear more. She hurried back to her quarters, tears finally breaking free as she closed her door behind her. The day's events crashed over her like a wave. The destruction, the accusations. The sight of Daniel's proud shoulders bowed under suspicion. But as she sat at her small desk, a different emotion began to rise through her grief. Determination. She knew Daniel's heart, his integrity. She had seen how he treated every child, plain or English, with the same gentle respect. The truth had to be told. The truth had to be told. Clara lit her lamp and pulled out her writing paper. Tomorrow was Sunday, and the whole town would gather at the meeting house. She would speak not just for Daniel, but for all they had hoped to build together. Her pen scratched across the page as she worked into the night, choosing each word carefully. The measure of a community, she wrote, lies not in how well we prosper in good times, but in how we stand together when tragedy strikes. The lamp burned low as she continued writing, pouring out her heart in defense of a man who had dared to see beyond appearances and prejudice. Outside her window, a cool autumn wind stirred the leaves, carrying away the last traces of smoke from the ruined schoolhouse. But inside, Clara rode on, her resolve growing stronger with each line. Tomorrow would test everything they had built, every bridge they had tried to forge between their two worlds. She would not let fear and suspicion tear it all down without a fight. Sunday morning arrived under leaden skies, the autumn air heavy with tension. Clara stood before her small mirror, fingers trembling as she pinned her hair and straightened her best dress. The weight of what lay ahead pressed down on her shoulders like a physical burden. The meeting house bell tolled across. Calico Springs, calling the townsfolk to gather. Clara walked slowly down the dusty street, her written speech folded carefully in her pocket. Ahead, she could see people filing into the white-painted building, their faces grim and voices hushed. Inside, the usual peace of Sunday morning was nowhere to be found. The wooden pews buzzed with angry whispers and accusations. Daniel sat quietly near the back, his plain black hat held respectfully in his lap. Rebecca huddled close to his side, her small face worried. It had to be him. Mrs. Peterson's voice carried above the general murmur. Who else would benefit from destroying our proper schoolhouse? Nonsense, Thomas Baker, the blacksmith countered. I've known Daniel Yoder 3 years now. Never met a more honest man. Then what about that railroad fellow? Someone else called out. Mighty interested in Yoder's spring, wasn't he? The railroad agent, Mr. Horace Lyle, sat stiffly in his fine suit, his face a mask of practiced indifference. But Clara noticed how his fingers drummed restlessly against his knee. The chairman called for order, his gavel cracking against the wooden podium. We're here to discuss this tragedy and determine what's to be done. Clara's heart pounded as she rose to her feet. The rustle of conversation died away as all eyes turned to her. She pulled out her carefully written pages, but then, looking at Daniel's steady presence, she tucked them away again. Truth needed no script. I stand before you today, she began, her voice gathering strength, not just as your children's teacher, but as someone who has seen the true heart of this community. She paused, meeting the gaze of parents whose children she had taught. Daniel Yoder came to us as a stranger, but he has shown nothing but honesty and kindness. I have watched him teach Rebecca gentleness with newborn lambs. I have seen him stop his work to help Widow Jenkins mend her fence. He cherishes children, all children, with a father's heart. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Clara saw some heads nodding, while others frowned in doubt. The Daniel Yoder I know, she continued, would never destroy something built for children's benefit. The meeting house door creaked open, cutting off her words. Every head turned as Host Ignazi, the respected Navajo elder, stepped inside. His dignified presence commanded immediate attention as he moved slowly down the aisle. His moccasins silent on the wooden floor. In his weathered hands, he held a folded document, its edges worn with age. I bring truth, he said, his voice deep and measured. From times before, many here drew breath. He approached the chairman's podium, carefully unfolding what proved to be an old deed. This paper speaks of water rights, he explained, signed by my father's father and Daniel Yoder's grandfather. It confirms the spring belongs to his family, and to the people of this valley, not to iron horses that drink but never give back. The railroad agent shot to his feet. That document can't possibly be legal. I have surveys, government approvals. Your papers are new, Hosteen Yazzie replied calmly. This truth is old. The water flows from sacred earth, meant for all who live here in peace. He turned to face the gathering. I have watched. Daniel Yoder shares his spring's blessing freely, as was promised. He keeps the old ways of honor. Shocked whispers filled the meeting house. Clara watched understanding dawn on face after face. The railroad agent's carefully constructed authority was crumbling before their eyes. This is absurd. Mr. Lyle blustered, his face reddening. "You can't possibly accept some ancient scrap of paper." "That scrap bears my grandfather's signature," Thomas Baker interrupted, leaning forward to examine the deed. "I'd know his hand anywhere." He was witness to this agreement. More voices joined in, memory surfacing of old stories told by parents and grandparents. The tide of opinion was turning, washing away lies and suspicion. Clara felt tears of relief threatening as she watched Mr. Lyle's composed facade crack further with each passing moment. Daniel finally stood, his quiet voice carrying clearly through the chaos. "I bear no ill will," he said simply. "Let truth speak for itself." Clara looked around the meeting house, seeing the change in people's faces. The very air seemed lighter, as if a dark cloud had begun to lift. She had defended what she knew to be right, and truth itself had arrived to confirm her faith. After the meeting house emptied, Sheriff Mills took Mr. Lyle aside, his weathered face stern. "I reckon we need to have us a long talk about that fire, Mr. Lyle, and about certain threats folks have reported." The railroad agent's confident smile finally crumbled as the sheriff led him toward the jailhouse tips, watching the autumn breeze scatter golden leaves across the dusty street. Her heart felt lighter than it had in weeks. Daniel approached, his plain black hat in his hands. "I'm much obliged, Clara," he said softly. Standing up like that, speaking truth when it wasn't easy. Clara smoothed her skirts, feeling a blush warm her cheeks. "I only said what needed saying. Faith and justice guided my words, nothing more. Yeah. But it took courage to speak them." His eyes were kind beneath the brim of his hat. Rebecca tugged at Daniel's sleeve, pointing toward the burned schoolhouse. Already, townspeople were gathering there, carrying shovels and wheelbarrows. Thomas Baker's strong voice called out, "Let's clear this mess and start fresh." Daniel offered Clara his arm. "Shall we help?" Together, they walked to where the schoolhouse had stood. The sight of the charred timbers still made Clara's heart ache, but now that ache was touched with hope. Men were already hauling away blackened boards, while women organized the salvageable items. Miss Bennet. Little Sarah Jenkins came running up, her braids flying. "Look what we found." She held up a slightly singed primer, its pages still intact. Clara knelt down, taking the book carefully. "Why, this is wonderful. And I see more children gathering stones for the foundation." She pointed to where a group of youngsters, both Amish and English, worked together, collecting rocks from the creek bed. "Ain't it something?" Mrs. Peterson spoke up, her earlier suspicion replaced with neighborly warmth. "Children show us the way sometimes, working together, no thought for differences." The afternoon passed in shared labor. Clara helped sort through recovered supplies while Daniel and other men marked out the new foundation. Every so often, their eyes would meet across the busy scene, and Clara felt that same warm flutter in her chest. As the sun began to set, Daniel touched her elbow. "We've done good work today. Would you join us for supper? Rebecca has something she'd like to share." Clara looked around at the progress they'd made. The site cleared, stones gathered, and hope restored. "I'd be honored," she replied. The walk to Daniel's homestead was peaceful, with Rebecca skipping ahead, humming a hymn tune. The cabin glowed with lamplight as they approached, smoke curling from the chimney into the darkening sky. Inside, the table was already set, simple but welcoming. The scent of fresh bread and stewed chicken filled the warm air. Clara hung her shawl by the door, feeling the familiar comfort of this place settle around her shoulders. Rebecca practically bounced with excitement as they took their seats. "Uncle Daniel, may I say grace tonight?" Daniel's face softened with pride. "Yeah, little one." Rebecca stood straight and tall, opened her primer with careful fingers, and began to read. Her voice was clear and confident as she spoke the familiar words, only hesitating once or twice over the longer phrases. Clara felt tears welling up as she listened. This was the same child who had been too shy to read aloud just weeks ago. Now here she stood, her face glowing with achievement. Reading grace to bless their meal. When Rebecca finished, she looked up at Clara with shining eyes. "Did I do good, Miss Bennet?" "You did wonderfully," Clara whispered past the lump in her throat. She reached out to squeeze Rebecca's small hand. As they shared the simple but delicious meal, Clara felt the rightness of sitting at this table. The warmth wasn't just from the hearth fire or the good food. It came from belonging. From being accepted exactly as she was, Daniel passed her the breadbasket and their fingers brushed. When she met his gaze, she saw in his eyes all the things that didn't need words: respect, tenderness, and something deeper growing between them. He didn't need grand declarations anymore. His quiet regard wrapped around her like a warm quilt on a cold night. Rebecca chattered happily about helping to rebuild the schoolhouse, her earlier reading success giving her new confidence. Clara watched Daniel listening to his niece, saw the love and pride in his expression, and felt her own heart expand with affection for them both. Here, in this plain cabin with its simple furnishings and abundant love, Clara finally understood. She wasn't just their teacher anymore. She was part of something larger, a family forming day by day, meal by meal, kindness by kindness. Just as the town was coming together to rebuild the schoolhouse, her own life was being rebuilt on a foundation of acceptance and genuine care. The October sun hadn't yet crested the eastern hills when wagons began rolling toward the schoolhouse site. Frost sparkled on the grass, and breath clouded in the crisp morning air as townspeople gathered with tools and determination. Clara arrived to find Daniel already there, splitting logs with powerful swings of his axe. His plain black coat hung on a nearby branch, and his suspenders stood out dark against his white shirt. Other men joined him, the rhythmic thud of their tools breaking the dawn silence. "Miss Bennet," Sarah Jenkins called out, helping her mother unload cooking pots from their wagon. "We brought the tent for lessons." Clara smiled, watching as several men raised the canvas structure. The makeshift classroom wouldn't be fancy, but it would serve until the new schoolhouse was complete. She arranged salvaged benches in neat rows while more families arrived, their children clutching books and slates. "Time for lessons," she called out, her voice carrying across the busy site. 20 children settled onto the benches, their faces eager despite the early hour. Even Rebecca, usually so hesitant, sat near the front with quiet confidence. Through the canvas walls, Clara could hear the steady work outside, hammers striking nails, saws biting wood, and the low murmur of conversation. She led her students through their arithmetic, her voice clear and steady above the construction sounds. Around mid-morning, whispers caught her attention. 2 women passed near the tent, their voices carrying clearly. Stubborn as mules, these Amish folk won't even use proper tools. Plain folk should stick to their own kind. Clara's cheeks burned, but she kept her focus on the lesson. Through the tent's opening, she could see Daniel working tirelessly, ignoring the gossip with quiet dignity. He hadn't stopped since dawn, moving between tasks with determined energy. By midday, savory smells wafted from the cooking fires where women tended huge pots of stew. Children took turns fetching water from the creek, their buckets sloshing as they carefully picked their way up the bank. Clara had just dismissed her students for the meal when she heard Rebecca's frightened cry, "Uncle Daniel." She rushed from the tent to find Daniel on one knee, his face alarmingly pale. Without hesitation, Clara hurried to his side, her arms supporting his shoulders. "You need rest," she said firmly, helping him to a shaded spot beneath a maple tree. Rebecca hovered anxiously nearby, twisting her apron in her hands. "I am well enough," Daniel protested, but his voice was weak. The work will wait," Clara insisted. She sent Rebecca to fetch water while she pressed her hand to Daniel's brow, checking for fever. His skin was cool but clammy. Her fingers lingered, brushing back a stray lock of his dark hair. Daniel's eyes met hers, and something unspoken passed between them. His hand came up to catch hers, holding it for a moment against his cheek. Clara felt her heart flutter at the gentle touch. "You must eat and rest," she said softly. "You're no good to anyone if you collapse from exhaustion." Rebecca returned with water and a bowl of stew. Clara sat with them while Daniel ate, making sure he took proper time to rest. Other workers nodded approvingly as they passed, their earlier whispers forgotten in concern for their neighbor, as afternoon shadows lengthened. Daniel insisted on returning to work, though Clara made him promise to take things slower. She returned to her lessons, but found herself glancing often through the tent flap. Checking on him when evening approached, parents began arriving to collect their children. But instead of leaving, families lingered. Someone brought out a fiddle, and another produced a hymn book. Soon, the tent filled with voices raised in song. Clara stood near the back, watching as her students led their parents in amazing grace. Rebecca's sweet voice carried the melody while Daniel's deep bass provided harmony. The blended voices of Amish and English townspeople rose into the darkening sky, a testament to their shared purpose. As the final notes faded, Clara felt Daniel's presence beside her. She turned to find him watching her with warm eyes, his face peaceful despite his earlier exhaustion. "Thank you," he said quietly, "for caring." Clara felt a blush warm her cheeks. "Of course I care," she whispered back. They stood together in comfortable silence as people began gathering their things to leave. The bond between them had grown stronger today, tempered by concern and kindness. No grand declarations were needed. Their actions spoke clearly enough of deepening affection. Rebecca came to join them, slipping her small hand into Clara's. "Will you come for supper again soon?" she asked hopefully. Clara squeezed the child's hand, sharing a glance with Daniel. "I'd like that very much." As the stars began appearing in the autumn sky, the schoolhouse site grew quiet. Tomorrow would bring another day of work, but tonight Clara's heart was full. Every log hewn, every stitch sewn, every lesson taught brought them closer, not just to a new schoolhouse, but to a stronger community. And perhaps, she thought, catching Daniel's eye one last time, to something even more precious. Early December brought a sharpness to the mountain air. Clara wrapped her shawl tighter as she watched fresh snow dust the distant peaks, their white caps gleaming against the pale blue sky. The schoolhouse walls now stood tall and sturdy, a testament to countless hours of shared labor. Inside, the rough-hewn planks still smelled of fresh pine, and late afternoon sunlight streamed through newly installed windows. "Children, let's try the first verse again," Clara called out, tapping her pointer against her palm. 20 young faces looked back at her, some eager, others fidgeting on the temporary benches. Paper chains and evergreen boughs decorated the bare walls, humble decorations for their upcoming moquette. Ruby Kiss, Moloquiate, Moloki Kiss. Only Ruby Kiss has the luxurious texture that clies, and lies on smallast, and lies aloud Moloquiate, molasting color. Moloquiate, molasting color. Molast, molass. Molast is at 6. Molast, we see me with suicide. My SHF, my millisase, ATP, my molat, by I lap it, by it lies a cow mad, it canide, pi lie we kick I seek I says it assess it sickwees cad me lips cassick kadas because it he back Christmas recital. Rebecca Yoder stood near the front, clutching her Bible with white-knuckled fingers. Her eyes darted nervously to the doorway where Daniel leaned, his tall frame filling the entrance. He nodded encouragingly to his niece. "Go ahead, Rebecca," Clara said softly, "just like we practiced." Rebecca took a deep breath and opened her Bible to the marked page. Her voice started as a whisper, but grew stronger with each word. "The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. He maketh me to lie down in green pastures." Clara's heart swelled with pride as Rebecca continued through the 23rd Psalm without stumbling. The child who had once been too shy to read aloud now spoke with quiet confidence. Other students watched attentively, respect showing on their young faces. When Rebecca finished, Daniel's deep voice carried from the doorway. "Well done, child." His plain black hat was clutched in his hands, and his eyes shone with pride. Clara gathered the children back into their positions for the Christmas hymn they'd been practicing. Their voices rose together, some sweet and clear, others endearingly off-key. The familiar melody of Silent Night filled the unfinished. Schoolhouse. The peaceful moment shattered as running footsteps approached. Tommy Miller, the telegraph operator's son, burst through the doorway, nearly colliding with Daniel. His face was flushed from running, and he clutched a yellow telegram paper in his hand. "Mr. Yoder." Tommy gasped. "Pa said to bring this straight away." Daniel took the telegram, his expression growing grave as he read. Clara noticed his hands tighten on the paper, creating deep creases. She turned to the children quickly. "That's enough practice for today," she said, keeping her voice steady despite the worry blooming in her chest. "Remember to practice your parts at home. You're dismissed." As the children gathered their things and filed out, Clara moved to Daniel's side. Rebecca lingered nearby, her earlier confidence replaced by anxiety as she watched her uncle's face. "What is it?" Clara asked softly. Daniel handed her the telegram, his movements stiff. Clara read the typed words quickly, her heart sinking. The railroad company had filed a federal lawsuit to seize Daniel's spring-fed land through eminent domain. They claimed the water rights were essential for regional development. "They mean to take it all," Daniel said quietly. "The spring, the farm, our home." His voice caught on the last word. And Rebecca pressed against his side. Clara straightened her shoulders, lifting her chin. "Then we'll fight them," she declared. "Your family's deed is solid. The Navajo elder's testimony proves your rightful claim. We won't let them steal what's yours through legal trickery." Daniel looked down at her, his eyes softening despite his worry. "It will be a hard battle. The railroad has powerful lawyers, money for bribes, but they don't have what we have," Clara insisted. She reached for his hand without thinking, clasping it firmly. Faith, truth, a community standing together. Daniel's fingers tightened around hers. "I cannot imagine facing this fight without you," he admitted quietly. His words carried a weight that made Clara's heart flutter. Rebecca slipped her small hand into Clara's free one, completing their circle. The setting sun painted the schoolhouse walls in warm gold and through the windows. Clara could see the first evening star appearing above the snow-touched mountains. "We'll face it together," Clara promised, squeezing both their hands. "All of us." Daniel nodded slowly, some of the tension leaving his shoulders. "Together," he echoed, his voice growing stronger. With God's help and honest hearts, they stood there as the December twilight deepened. Three souls bound by something stronger than fear. Outside, the last rays of sun caught the mountaintop snow, making it glitter like hope itself. The railroad's threat loomed dark and heavy. But in that moment, Clara felt the power of their unity. Bright and unshakable as the evening star above them, the January morning dawned bitter cold as Clara climbed into Daniel's wagon. Her breath formed small clouds in the frosty air while he helped her onto the wooden seat. Rebecca stayed behind with the Amish women, though her worried eyes followed them as they set out for the county seat. The wagon wheels creaked over frozen ruts. and Clara pulled her woolen shawl tighter. After a few silent miles, she began to pray aloud, her voice steady despite her nervousness. Lord, guide us with your wisdom. Let truth prevail. Daniel's amen was soft but firm. His capable hands held the reins loosely as their mule plodded onward. The courthouse rose before them after 3 hours. Travel lay imposing brick building with white columns that made Clara's heart flutter with anxiety. Inside, the courtroom smelled of polish and pipe smoke. Townsfolk and railroad men filled the wooden benches, their whispers echoing off the high ceiling. The railroad's lawyer, a sharp-featured man from Denver, rose with a flourish of expensive coattails. Your Honor, he declared, progress cannot be stopped by one stubborn farmer. The railroad's need for water rights supersedes private claims. Mr. Yoder's resistance threatens the very future of this territory. Clara sat straight-backed beside Daniel, watching the judge's expression. When their turn came, she stood with trembling knees but steady voice. From her satchel, she withdrew the carefully preserved deed that Hostine Yazzie had provided. This document, Your Honor, proves the Yoder family's rightful claim. She presented it with reverence, and we have witnesses to speak to its authenticity. Hostine Yazzie himself rose from the back bench, his silver hair catching the weak winter sunlight from the high windows. 2 other tribal elders stood with him. Their testimony rang with dignity and truth as they confirmed the old agreements about the spring waters. The judge studied the deed carefully, adjusting his spectacles. The courthouse fell so silent that Clara could hear the scratch of his pen as he made notes. After what felt like hours, he cleared his throat. The court finds in favor of Daniel Yoder, he announced firmly. His water rights are hereby confirmed and protected under territorial law. Joy erupted around them. Daniel's supporters clapped and cheered, while the railroad men stormed out scowling. Clara felt tears of relief spring to her eyes as Daniel clasped her hand. The ride home seemed shorter, though darkness fell early. Stars appeared one by one in the clear winter sky, their light reflecting off patches of snow. The mule knew the way. Leaving Daniel free to turn toward Clara, I feared to love again, he said softly, his voice barely above a whisper. After Sarah, my wife, passed, I thought that part of my heart was finished. He paused, his hand finding hers in the darkness. But you, Clara, you've healed that fear. Clara's heart soared at his words. She squeezed his hand in reply, letting the quiet starlight and the gentle sway of the wagon speak what her voice could not yet say. Their joined hands rested between them, warm despite the winter chill. As they rode home to begin their new chapter together, the rebuilt schoolhouse blazed with warmth on Christmas Eve, every window glowing golden against the darkening sky. Garlands of pine and red ribbon decorated the walls, and the scent of cinnamon and apple cider filled the air. Townsfolk crowded the benches, Amish families in their plain clothes, settlers in their Sunday best, and Navajo neighbors wrapped in colorful blankets against the cold. At the front, Clara stood beside the children, her hands moving gracefully as she led them through silent night. Rebecca's clear voice rose above the others, her eyes bright with confidence as she read each verse from the hymnal without hesitation. Clara's heart swelled with pride at how far her young student had come. As the final notes faded, Daniel rose from his seat in the front row. The lamplight caught the silver threading through his dark beard as he took Clara's hand in his. The room fell silent. Months ago, he said, his voice carrying to every corner, I spoke true words about this woman. Tonight, I speak them again. His grip tightened gently on Clara's fingers. Clara, I don't just dream about a curvy woman like you. I dream about a wife, a home, and a family with you. Gasps rippled through the gathering. Mrs. Miller, who had once whispered cruel words, dabbed at her eyes with a handkerchief. Clara's smile illuminated her face as she nodded. Unable to speak through happy tears, they stepped out into the snowy night together. children laughing and dancing around them as white flakes drifted down. The schoolhouse windows spilled light onto the fresh snow, but brighter still was the joy of love and acceptance that warmed them all. Thanks for watching. Stories like this shape us in ways we don't always expect. If something resonated, subscribe. I'm back tomorrow with another one worth hearing.